Okay, good evening, everybody. We're starting a new Perek, Elein Aloikin. Third Perek of Makkos, which talks about Malkus. It's really like almost like three different Masechtas. The first Perek is about Edim Zemim. The second Perek of Makkos is about Golos. And the third Perek is really discussing the Einish of Malkus. The Einish of Malkus is generally given to somebody who is Chayvi Lavin. We'll soon see more details. But basically, when there's no other punishment and there's a Lav in the Torah, so you get Malkus. Today's Amud really is Gimel Amud base, but Eilin Aloikin starts and towards the end of his Gimel Amud Aleph. We'll try and get through as much as we can of his Gimel Amud base as well. It's not a very hard Amud. Just outside, just a little bit of an overview of what we're learning today. The Mishnah gives a list of all the different people who get Malkus. The truth is, it's not all the different people who get Malkus because it's not a comprehensive list. It's not every single case. It's a list. Rashi and Tosfos explain that it's a list of those which there's some sort of chiddush involved, as we'll soon see when we learn Rashi. The Gemara itself is going to bring a machlokes tanoim, a brayso, whether what about chayve krisis, chayve Mrs. Bezdin? Do they also get malchus as well as getting the kares and Mrs. Bezdin or not? There's three different opinions, and we'll start talking about the reasons for each shitta of those tanoim. That's kind of today's amot. So let's see inside. These are the people who get malchus. Someone who's bar, someone has relations either with his sister or his father's sister or his mother's sister, or his sister-in-law, his wife's, the sister of his wife. Sorry, right? Okay, so these are all just cases of arroyas where it's incest. It's a family member. Or it's the wife of a brother, and the point is not just. Besides for being an Eishes Ish, even if someone's brother passes away, the Eishes Achiv is still an Arayas. It's still somebody you're not allowed to live with, you're not allowed to marry, you're not allowed to live with, you're not allowed to bear with. And Val Eishes Achi Aviv, the same thing is with the wife of his father's brother. Va'al Hanida, someone, Kares is also someone who's Ba'al Hanida. Almona L'Kohen Gadol, so those are all cases of Kares, right? But besides for the Kares, there's also Malchus, according to the shitta of this Tana of our Mishnah, as we'll explain in the Gemara. Almona l'kohen gadol grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. These are Isuri Lav in that sense. The kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, is not allowed to have relations with an almana. So if he does, there's malchus. Grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. The same thing applies to a grusha or a chalutza, a divorced woman or chalutza. Chalutza means somebody who was nizkzokuk liyavam. Her husband passed away, and she had to marry the brother of her husband, but she didn't marry. Instead, she got chalitza from him instead. So she's a chalutza. She's asked to marry kohen hedyot, and she gets malchus. So we'll discuss a little bit more about that soon. Whether the issa chalutza is the raisa, the rabbanon. But the Mishnah over here takes on. Well, the Mishnah over here says that there's a chi of malchus the chalutza the kohen hedyot. Mamzeres on the scene of Yisrael, a mamzeres, a woman who's a mamzer. Or a Nesina. Nesina is a nation which Yeshua came in the days of Yeshua, and they became Gerim, and ultimately, because they're from the Shiva Amim in the 7 nations, you're not allowed to marry them even after then is Gaia, at least according to some shittas. And that's how we're going to explain it over here in Nesina Yisrael. Bas Yisrael and Nasan all the other way around. It doesn't just have, right? Bas Yisrael and Nasan Lamamza, a Yiddish girl to a Nasan, to one of these Gerim, men who became Jewish from the 7 nations, from the Shiva Amin, or the Mamza. It's an Isser allowed to marry, and there's Malchus for these cases. Okay. Now the Mishnah continues. Almano grusha chayam la mishum shnei shemes. Then an almano grusha, meaning a woman who's both an almano and grusha, one woman, right? But she was nisalmana from one man, and then she was nisgarsha from another man. In that order, by the way, because if it's the other way around, it's going to be an issue of ein issa chalal issa, and it's not necessarily going to be 2 isurim. But over here, we're talking about a woman who became an almana, and then she got married to someone else, and then got divorced. So now the kohen gadol is not allowed to marry her for 2 reasons. Because the kohen gadol is not allowed to marry a grusha, but the kohen gadol is also not allowed to marry an almana. So what happens if he marries this woman? He gets 2 malchus for the 2 different isurim of almana and grusha. Grusha v'chalutz, however, a kohen, a regular kohen, marries a woman who was both niskarsha from one man and accepted chalitza from another man. She only gets 1 malchus, and we'll explain that when we learn the Rashi inside. Yeah, okay. Some more cases of malchus, and again, it's not an exhaustive list, but each case has some sort of chiddush involved, and that's why they're in the Mishnah. Hatami sha'acheles hakodesh, a Tami person who ate regular kadshim, va'abal hamikdash Tami, or someone who comes into the base hamikdash while being Tami, va'oichel chela v'dam v'noisor pigel, or someone who eats chela, which is forbidden fat of an animal, dam, blood of an animal, noisar is a carbon which is left over after the allotted time where it's supposed to be eaten, so you're not allowed to eat it. And if you do eat it, it's a chi of lav, whatever the lashon of the pasuk is. We'll see when we see Rashi. Or pigul. Pigul is somebody who has a machshava when he shechts it, or when he does, I think, one of any of the other avodas as well, right? Haylacha or zrika. But at the time of doing the avodah, he has in mind that he's going to eat it outside of the zman. The ma'aseh, he doesn't eat it outside of the zman. Nevertheless, that becomes pigul because he had the wrong machshava, because he had intention to eat it outside the zman. It becomes pigul, and yichayev malchus for eating pigul. V'tamei, or somebody who eats kodshim which became tamei. That's what the tamei means. Yeah, if you remember correctly. Tamei is someone who eats, someone who eats the kodshim which becomes tamei. Similarly, somebody who shechts or offers up, right, on the carbon, on like a bama, or on outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Once there's a Beis Hamikdash, you're not allowed to shecht a carbon or offer it up outside of the Beis Hamikdash. If you do, if you do either one of the two, right, it's a chi of lav and is malchus. Someone who eats chametz on Pesach, it's a lav of, right, and it's also kares. We're going back to the Surah kares now. Already, so someone who eats chametz on Pesach is a lav, or somebody who eats or does work on Yom Kippur is also a lav, and it's also kares, but it's also malchus, because this mission is going with the shitta that every chayve krisis gets malchus as long as there's no mises bezin involved. In other words, there's no other misa oynish bidei adam, then you get malchus. I'm a fatim Hashem, and someone who copies the shemen hamishcha. He makes the same ingredients and he uses it for himself. Not uses it, he just makes it. Fatim Hashem, and he has somebody who just he copies the ingredients of the shemen hamishcha. But fatim is and someone who copies the Ketores. We'll see in Rashi all the different Makkos for these Isurim, but they're all lavin, and you get Malchus. Someone who actually uses the Shemen HaMishkal, which Moshe Rabbeinu made to anoint the Kalim in the Mishkan. You use it for your own personal purposes. It's a lav. Someone who eats nevela, an animal which hasn't been nevela is an animal which hasn't been shechted or otherwise died. Shechted improperly or died. So nevela or trephus is an animal which is not going to last for 12 months. It's unhealthy and it's not going to survive for a year. And you go and you shecht it, even a kosher shechita, because it's treifa and you're not allowed to eat it. And it's a lav, and you get malchus, shkotzim, or masim. These are the different species which are creepy crawlies and which are in Torah you're not allowed to eat. Okay, so you get malchus. Now we continue with more examples. Achal tevel, if you eat tevel, tevel is any food which truma wasn't taken yet from, so it's pre-truma, meaning truma has to be taken from it before you're allowed to eat it, and you didn't take truma and you ate it, so it's a lav. Or ma'aser rishon shlegnit from us, or for that matter, it's another type of tavel essentially, which is you gave the Levi has ma'aser rishon, he's allowed to eat it. In fact, even Yisrael who eats ma'aser rishon isn't there's no issa of a yid eating ma'aser rishon. It's a matana which goes to the Levi, it becomes his property. But before the Levi is allowed to eat it, Trumas Maisa has to be taken, Maisa min Maisa, and if it's not taken, you over lav and you get malchus. So Maisa Sheni of Hekdesh Nifta, the same thing applies, meaning there's also lav with regards to Maisa Sheni or Hekdesh, which Maisa Sheni, which wasn't redeemed, you're eating it outside of Yerushalayim. Hekdesh, you're not allowed to eat at all, and until it's redeemed. Once it's redeemed, you can. But if either Maisa Sheni or Hekdesh wasn't redeemed, and you're eating the Maisa Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, or you're eating the Hekdesh before it's been redeemed, so it's a lav. Kama yoichem, it's hey, now we go into a side topic. Kama yoichem in a tavel v'yechayev. How much of the tavel do you have to eat in order to be chayev? Reb Shimon oimer kol shu. Hey, shit of Reb Shimon. Shimon says even a mash or even a small amount. We'll soon see. The Gemara is going to elaborate on it, and we'll soon see. It doesn't literally mean any small amount. We'll qualify it in a moment. But Chacham oimer kazayis. Chacham says just like any other iser. Kazayis. Why should it be kol shu? Amalei Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said to the Chacham, "Yata moidli ba'oichel nemala kol shu chayev." You agree to me when it's an ant, right? That if you eat a whole ant, it doesn't have to be a kazayas and chayav. So why don't you agree to me when you get to tavel that also a mashu is good enough, or shall we say one piece of one kernel of wheat? So Amr the Chacham said to him, "Neishu kibriyasa." The reason why you chayav on an ant, even though it's not a kazayas, is because you're eating a whole barrier. You're eating it the way it was created. So Amr the Henry Shimon Tak said back to him, "Afchita achas kibriyasa." There's certain instances where the tevel as well, where it's just one chita and it's the way it grows. So therefore, that's his shitta, that as long as it's the way it grows. So that's the mission. We'll quickly go through Rashi. We missed out many types of malchus. The mission says chayve krisis to tell you that there's malchus b'chayve krisis because it's disputed in the Gemara. Not everyone agrees that there's Malchus b'chayv krisis. The halacha is that there is Malchus b'chayv krisis, and this Mishnah holds that there is Malchus, but there's a chiddush involved. The reason why it says almana grusha is not for the chiddush of almana grusha per se, but rather to tell us the case that when a woman who's an almana and a grusha, and a kohen gadol was baaleh, he gets two Malchus. The chiddush over there is the loy mefarish lav didu behadya. The lav of eating tevel and ma'aserishim, which truma wasn't taken, is not a ferush, is not explicit in the Torah. Hekdesh as well, it's not ferush in the Torah. But what about ma'aser? So there's I did ton hekdesh ton ma'aser sheni, but it's survive Malchus in the mishum mechusar b'tia. Ma'aser sheni is a little bit by the way. Since hekdesh is a chiddush, so even though by ma'aser sheni there's no chiddush, but it's the same theme that the issa, the Malchus is because it wasn't redeemed. If it were to be redeemed, you'd be able to eat it. Similarly, by all the other cases, by the majority of them, there is some sort of chiddush. That's what Rashi said. Yeah, Mishnah's only time. Yeah, Tosfos basically says the same thing. Yeah. Almana grusha shenis'amna mi'ishach nisgarsha mi'ish acher. If it's nis'amna mishach nisgarsha mishacher in that order only, by the way, then you chayv aleh mishum shtei shemes, shtei malchus mishum shtei shemes, Rashi mishum shtei azhar shtei mufrashes b'mikra, both of them mufresh in the mik in the pasuk. Almana or grusha lo yikach. That's hard. Ravai kaime the loy, the lav to tell you not to do it is going on both of them. But grusha b'chalutza, however, if you a regular kohen marry someone who's both a grusha and a chalutza. Grusha v'hi chalutza ain't chayv aleh mishum grusha. Only chayv because of grusha. And the way Rashi learns is shachalutza ain't ksuva ela miriboy ma'asin. Since the chalutza isn't written the ferush in the Torah, but rather it's from a riboy. So therefore, you can only be chayav one. Taka, if you would be over, if you according to Rashi, he's learning that chalutza is deraisa. Many Rishonim argue that chalutza is only derabana, and the pasuk is an asmachta ba'alma, and then you have to deal with. But let's just deal with Rashi for the moment. Rashi holds that chalutza is midaraisa, it's a midaraisa, but since it's not the ferush in the pasuk, it's from the extra vav of the grush of the isha, yeah. Titania b'kedushin grusha any other grusha chalutz minayin tam leim the isha. In other words, it doesn't say anywhere clearly chalutz in the pasuk. So it's not. It's exactly. So you can only get if you do grusha chalutz. It's one lav. There's one lav. The lav is either grusha or chalutza. But if you do both, if a woman's both a grusha and a chalutza, the same person, you're not going to be chayiv two. You're only going to be chayiv one. Rashi would hold that if you were involved in the chalutza alone, you get one malchus. Yeah. So how do we deal with the other people? Well, let's deal with the other Rishonim quickly. The other Rishonim who say the chalutza is drabanan there's two problems. Number one is what's the Mishnah saying earlier when he says that he's malchus for chalutza. So basically, one option which the Rishonim say often is that really chalutza is takar. There's no malchus, and it's just agav grusha. It just says agav grusha. Others say it means makas mardos. And what the Mishnah is basically saying is that grusha you get malchus, chalutza you get makas mardos. Grusha v'chalutza you won't get a malchus and a makas mardos. You'll just get the rein malchus. Because the whole purpose of makas mardos is to deter a person from doing an avera. Here the deterrent is there anyway because you're getting malchus. There's no reason for the chacham to say you need makas mardos as well. Okay, so that's.
Klein gadol, chalutza is an issue regardless.
Why? She's not a basula. It's true. But she's an almana. Every chalutza is an almana, so it's just basically another word for almana. Yeah. Matami shachas hakodesh has a rasim mefarish b'gemara. The Gemara is going to explain what the lav is, where it says in Atami not allowed to eat kodesh, eat kachim. Noisa ksiv b'srafta sanoisa ba'ei. It says in the pasuk you need to burn noisa. Lo yoichal ki kodeshu. That's hars pigul nami mehacham b'tziv ki kodeshu. In other words, it says you're not allowed to eat noisa because it's kodesh, and that's a little bit extra. Ki kodesh, you're not allowed to eat noisa. What's up? Ki kodesh. So we learn from ki kodesh, neshu kodesh nifsa. Because it's kodesh, which became possible, you're not allowed to eat. And we learn from there that any type of kachim, which becomes possible, you're not allowed to eat. Laman mikan kol sheba kodesh possible. Anything which was holy and became tamei, you're not allowed to. Bar kasalit and loisa salaki las. Vachamin l'kamon, and that's what the Gemara is going to say later. But as haras tamei, and as haras tamei meaning a kosher, a tired person who eats kachim which became tamei is from the pasuk of Abasa Sheiga B'chol Tamei Lo Ya'achar. V'Ashoiche kachim b'chutz Oya Mala kachim b'chutz. The case of someone who shechts kachim outside, or someone who is Mala kachim outside, is from the pasuk as Haris Mala. The Mala is a ferish pasuk. Yishamel chapen tala oilisach b'chol makom ashatir. You're not allowed to offer karbanis. What about shchita? As Haris Shoiche Yapinu B'zvachim Perek Shoichet v'Hamayla. In the Perek of a Sheikh V'Amala, we learn it out, and there's different pshatim of the two options. Ikad the Aleph V'lo Yiz B'choid. Some out from the pasuk V'lo Yiz B'choid. I'm not familiar exactly with how it's learned out, but V'lo Yiz B'choid Las'irim Ashahem Zoivchim. So perhaps just it's talking about something else, but we learn from it that Lo Yiz B'choid goes on Shchotei Chutz. Ikad the Aleph L'Migzei Shava the Hava Sheikhet Mimala. The Gzei Shava, the word Hava is said by Sheikhet and Hava by Mala, so we learn one from the other. Ha'oicha b'Yom Kippurim v'Yalef Hazaras Pei Pasuk Yoma. That's the lav is in The Gemara explains in Yoma. We all know that the pasuk says you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. Hamafatim is Hashemen. What does mefatim literally means? He fattens the shemen. Rashi explains. So ois Hashemen bedugmas shemen amishcha. You make shemen in the same. You don't have to use it. Just making the mere making of it is a problem. You're not allowed to make in the same. You're not allowed to copy the ingredients of the shemen amishcha. You actually use the shemen. You're not talking about copying over here. They were talking about that you actually anoint. You use the shemen amishcha which Moshe made in the midbar, and it says in the pasuk, "Ksel basar adam lo yisach." So that's the lav, and therefore there's malchus for it. Achal tevel az rasim v'lo yichalu es kadshe b'nei Yisrael asher yorimu. So you shouldn't be mechal kadshe b'nei Yisrael, which you will give truma. The lashon asher yorimu is awkward. So we learn basidin litrim akasim medav. The pasuk is talking about the kadshe b'nei Yisrael, which you are going to give truma from, meaning you haven't yet. That teva, which this pasuk is a marker for not eating teva. Or my institution explained it to Masi afu teva. It's included in teva. It's also teva. Eating outside of Yerushalayim. It's a pasuk which says you're not allowed to eat it bisharecha, meaning outside of Yerushalayim, in your cities, in your gates. We have a bit of a problem. The pasuk says, the Mishnah says that you are get malchus for hektish, for eating, using hektish. But where's the lav for it? So it's not mafurasha. So here Rashi comes up with his own, but nira be'enai, right? It's not based on another Gemara. Rashi's coming up with the limud for himself. The mehacha asa, the Tanya, we learned in the Bryce and Gemara and Sanhedrin brought down hizid b'meila. If you amaze it and you didn't meila, Rabbi says you get misa. Chacham says it's a lav for being moil, meaning having hana from kachim. Vamrin on my time with Rabbi. The Gemara there says, what's the reason of Rabbi that you get misa? It doesn't say anywhere that you get misa from meila. So it says also chet mitruma. It's exer shava chet mitruma. Eat truma you chayav misa. So you use meila, you also chayav misa. Rabbanan mir rachmanan mesu by v'lei b'meila. The Rabbanan have a meal. So although we learn exer shava, but nevertheless, there's a possible mesu by truma which excludes meila. But nevertheless, mi miso dema'ait exer shava k'dekayim kayim. Even the Rabbanan are only saying that you don't get misa, but the exer shava stays, and therefore you have exer shava from truma to meila. So just as the lav that Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma, so too Rashi was suggesting the alpinan as hard the meila mazarasa did truma. Right? The chsib of chazal lecha kodesh says to me get to truma b'chazal lecha kodesh, which means that Zar can't eat truma. And meila is learned from exer shava chet. Even the Rabbanan who don't hold with exer shava the whole way, that's only because of that's only going to get to misa where the pasuk says meisu by v'lei b'meila. But for everything else, we're left with a exer shava. The roid hook is meila. He made the mitruma b'teres kainim b'gzer shavazu. But oichel nemela gosin shuchai mishum sheretz hasheretz halal. Okay, chai because it's a sheretz. Okay, that's the Mishnah. A whole list of different things which you chayav malchus for. So now the Gemara says as follows. Included in the Mishnah, they weren't all chayv increases, but many of them, especially the first half of the Mishnah, I think for some reason I don't know exactly the structure of the Mishnah, but the first half of the Mishnah till Almana l'Kohen Gadol were all chayv increases, and later as well. Definitely ha'ichel chametz, and I'm not sure all of it, right? I'm not sure exactly what, but definitely there's later also ha'ichel va'isam malacha b'yom kippurim. They're definitely chayv creases. So either way, we have in the Mishnah chayv creases. We don't have any chayv misas bezdin. Seems that the Tana of the Mishnah holds that chayv misas bezdin, even if there's no hasra or whatever. Well, actually, we'll get there soon. But chayv misas bezdin, it seems that there's never a situation where you get malchus, right? Someone's mechal Shabbos, even though the Torah says lo yisasam malach, it's a lav in the Torah, but because there's a chi of misas bezdin, you don't get malchus. So the Gemara is going to address that now. Zod Gemara, chayv krisis katani, chayv misas bezdin lo katani. The Mishnah says chayv krisis, but doesn't say any chayv misas bezdin. You won't find one chayv misas bezdin in this list. Mas Nisin Mani, who's our Mishnah? Going at Rabbi Kiva. He's going at Rabbi Kiva. Basically, now we're going to bring a three-way machlokes about who gets malchus and who doesn't get malchus. The Tanya we learned in the Bryce. Echod chayvi krisis ve'echod chayvi misas bezdin. Yashna b'chal malchus avam de Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that doesn't make a difference. Every lav in the Torah, basically, I think. I mean, besides obviously lav shem b'maisa, lav anitit naseh, there are certain exceptions, but as a general rule, echod chayvi misas krisis ve'echod chayvi misas bezdin. You get malchus. Someone who's mechal Shabbos will get malchus. Right?
We'll get, the only way you get malchus if there's an edim and a straw.
So Rashi explains it. So you need so one klal is for sure that everyone agrees that you need to have malchus. You need to have a straw full malchus. If two edim come along and say don't be mechal Shabbos, and if you're mechal Shabbos, you're going to get skila, and he goes after Pekin and he does, he's going to only get skila. The question is, what happens if you are master him for both, or at least for malchus as well? Rashi says over here that now we're talking about a situation where at this stage of the Gemara, we think that it's talking about where he's mastering for both, and even in such a situation, Rabbi Shmuel says you get both.
He doesn't hold of
We're going to discuss this on this very on. Yeah, Rabbi Shmuel. That's what Rabbi Shmuel says that that it doesn't. And it's important to understand the Bryce at this point is saying that you get both. There's gonna be different shittas within the Rabbi Shmuel, but at this point, let's just assume because the Gemara assumes that when we say that there's the Malkus Arboim for Mises Bezin, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it's you get both. As long as the Adam were master for both Misa and Malkus, you get both. That's what Rabbi Shmuel says. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Chayv Krisis Yashna Michal Malkus Abraham. Chayv Krisis do. I agree with you about Chayv Krisis, but not about Chayv Mises Bezin. What's the distinction? Why difference? He explains. By Chayv Krisis, you're not necessarily going to get kares because you can do tshuva and the Eibishter forgives you. He decides whether to give you kares or not. Chayv Mises Bezin, we know someone's Michal Shabbos. Even if he does tshuva a day later, he's still going to get skila. It's not how punishment works down here. Tshuva doesn't help for oinshei bidei adam. Punishments given out by Bezdin down here. So therefore, since kares you might not get, so therefore you get malchus. Chayv Mises Bezin, Chayv Mises Bezin, ein b'chal malchus abram shem also tshuva ein bezin shomat hamaychim. That's what the Brayse says. Now we have to keep in mind that this is not the only reason. It's not the be all and end all because the Gemara is going to give different reasons for the shit of Rabbi Kiva who says that there's a difference in Krisis and Mises Bezdin. But at this stage, we'll keep it in mind. We'll try and fit whatever the Gemara says later with what we say here as well. But at this stage, what the Brayse itself says, this is what we guf lashon Brayse, that the reason why Chayv Krisis doesn't get Malkus is because you're not necessarily going to get kares, because you could get out of it through tshuva. By Mises Bezdin, you are going to get Mises Bezdin anyway, so it seems if we don't give you two punishments. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Since there's a possibility that you'll get out of it, so you get Malkus. Chayv Mises Bezdin, since you're definitely going to get Mises Bezdin, we don't give you two punishments, and you don't get Malkus. Rabbi Yitzchak says no, even Chayv Krisis don't. He's like even more lenient, right? Kares is only for regular lavin, but not Chayv Krisis. Why? He says like this: Chayv Krisis b'chlal hoy. Chayv Krisis, we're all getting Malkus for, but the lama yotzes kares b'achoisai. In other words, there's a special kares which is said by achoisai. Yeah. So why? But the achoisai was already included in all the Chayv Krisis. So why does the pasuk say again? In other words, the pasuk says you get kares for the aroyas. All aroyas get kares. I don't remember the last one. Whoever does one of these acts, and then there's a special post by Achoyso to say you get kares. Why the need? So we say to tell you that Achoyso gets kares, only kares are not malchus. And then we have a klal which says that kol davar shayi b'klal v'yotzmin haklal alamed, anything which was in the klal, and it goes out of the klal to say that it's different than a klal. It's not coming to say that it's different from the klal. It's actually coming to teach on the whole klal. How that works exactly, I'm not sure exactly the logic. But since over here, the Achoyso was included in all our arroyos which get kares, nevertheless, the pasuk felt the need to say that Isha Shayikach Achoyso gets kares again, is coming to teach you that Achoyso gets kares, but not Malkus. And from there, we learn that anything which is similar to it, that all the other arroyos also only get kares and not Malkus. And we learn Benegay to all Chayv Krisis that there's no Malkus for Chayv Krisis. That's the shit of Rabbi Yitzchak. Yeah, Chayv Krisis b'klal v'yom yotzes kares b'Achoyso l'doyne b'kares. Let's quickly see the Rashis on this. This is the end of the Brayse. The three shittas we have over here, that either Chayv Krisis and Chayv Mises Bezdin get Malkus, or it's just Chayv Krisis, or according to Rabbi Yitzchak, it's neither. Only regular Chayv Lavin where there's no other Oynesh, there's no Kares or Mises Bezdin. So Rashi says Chayv Krisis, Tani Chol Chayv Krisis, She'ein Bahen Mises Bezdin, Husker Mishnah Seini, in Malkus. They're all mentioned in the Mishnah. They're all mentioned. All the Chayv Krisis are mentioned. None of the Chayv Mises are mentioned in the Mishnah that you should get Malkus. Keywords: Im Hisru Boila Malkus. If there was a Hasra for Malkus, there's no Hasra for Malkus, you don't get Malkus. You can only get a punishment if you were warned. But if you were warned for Malkus, it seems that even so you don't get Malkus according to the Mishnah. So who is it? So we say it's Rabbi Kiva. Why? Because Rabbi Shmuel Taka holds you do get Malkus for Chayv Mises Bezin. Yashnom B'chlal Malkus Arba says. Even right. The hashtag Haggadah Shem Hisru by Misal Malkus Loi Komeis. Rashi says. Rashi at the top of the page after you give him base. At this point, we think Sakadaite. I think we think Sheim Hisru by Misal Malkus. You get both. Rabbi Kiva says no. Only Chayv Krisis get. Why Chayv Krisis get? Why it should be different than Mises Bezin? Shem also Tshuva Legosin Rabbi Shmuel. Okay. Rabbi Kiva Oim Chayv Krisis Im Hisru by Malkus Yeshon B'chal Malkus V'Leikin. If you got Hasra, someone over Chayv Krisis like Oichel Chametz, for example, right? Or someone who eats an Yom Kippur, which is a Chayv Krisis. If they warned him for Malkus, he gets Malkus. Right? There's no problem with Kedei Rishasai. Right? Getting punished, two punishments for one act. Sha'ata oinshe Malkus im hechrach. In a car, so yeah. Why is it not two rishayis? There's a way out, so therefore it's not necessarily two punishments, and therefore we give you malchus. Later on, the Gemara is going to ask, but what do you mean? What about a situation where he doesn't do tshuva? So like how do you, right? We'll do the Gemara's deal with that question. But at this point, we're saying means we give you one punishment, not two. So why are we going one way? Why we say because he could get out of it? One second.
That punishment's in his head.
Right.
But not the Beis Din that's enforcing two punishments. Meaning the problem.
So either you're going to tell me this.
Beis Din is not.
So then who cares about the tshuva then?
What?
So even if you wouldn't do tshuva, so then even if you wouldn't do tshuva, I could argue Beis Din is not giving the punishment. So let him get malchus. The Bright over here says that the reason why he's not getting malchus is because he could do tshuva. He has a way out. And what if he doesn't do tshuva? What's going on?
Beis Din's not the one enforcing that. Beis Din's only responsible for what's in their hand.
I hear. So if that's the case, I would argue that even if he doesn't do tshuva, and there was no option of doing tshuva, even if tshuva wouldn't say better, even if tshuva wouldn't save him from kares, Beis Din is just giving him one punishment. The Brisa seems to hinge it on tshuva.
Punishment, meaning there is a clear enforced punishment, even though it's not in their hands to fulfill it, but there is a clear enforced punishment. If kares would automatically happen.
I hear the argument. Yeah, the Gemara is gonna ask. The Gemara takes on that no. That as long as there's two punishments, it's a problem, and even kares. In other words, either kares is considered a punishment which we don't say kedei rishasai, or it's not. If it's not, then who cares the fact that tshuva gets him out of kares? Even if tshuva wouldn't get him out of kares, the Beis Din are not giving the kares either way. So at this stage, we understand that kares is a punishment which is shaykh to say kedei rishasai, and the only reason why you get out of it, the only reason why you get malchus, is because there's a way out of the kares via tshuva. The Gemara is going to ask later what happens if he doesn't do tshuva. But at the moment, that's how Rashi explains it. There's two punishments, malchus or misa. Whenever he gets malchus, he's for sure going to get misa. Okay. Even chayv krisis, and even in the case where he was warned clearly you're going to get malchus, are not included in malchus. All the chayv krisis of aroyas were included in krisis. Why does the pasuk then again say kares by chayse la'atzma by itself? The tzibuk leishim tiyu v'ish kiyikis achayse v'goymet and gets kares. The other person gets kares. Lo doina b'kares lekach shana b'kares shelen loyma she'ein ben oynish ela kares levad. Tell you there's only kares. We have three shittas in the brisa. Chayve. First shitta is every lav basically. He's for sure going to agree to lav shein b'mais, lav nitla. Say certain exceptions, but as a general rule, any type of lav gets malchus, whether it's Mrs. Beis Din, whether it's a lav shesh b'kares, whether it's a regular lav. Rabbi Akiva says only chayve krisis and regular chayve lavin, and Rabbi Yitzchak says no, not even chayve krisis. And our Mishnah must go like the middle shitta of Rabbi Akiva that chayve krisis do get, right? Because only chayve krisis in the Mishnah, not chayve Mrs. Beis Din is going to Rabbi Akiva. So now the Gemara is going to go to the reasoning. My time in the Bishmal. What's the reason of Rabbi Shmuel who says that every single lav gets even chayve Mrs. Beis, even lav and sheyesh be Mrs. Beis Din, yeah, continue. Even lav and sheyesh be Mrs. Beis Din get malchus. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel. My time in the Rabbi Shmuel. What's the reason of Rabbi Shmuel? That every single lav in the Torah, even the lav sheyesh be Mrs. Beis Din, gets malchus. He says like this. The pasuk goes like this. The chsivim loisish melas is called the Torah zois. It's a pasuk in Parshas. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. Is it Kitzeitze or even Nisavim? Maybe it's Nisavim. Yeah, the pasuk is in loisish melas is called the Torah zois. If you don't keep all these Torah, and then the pasuk continues. Hashem will literally hifla means melashon wonder, but He's going to give your makkos. So hafla is any day. I don't know what this hafla is. When the pasuk says a similar word, we know that it's referring to malchus. So therefore we say like this: if you don't keep the whole Torah, anything you don't keep of the Torah, you get malchus for. So the Gemara straight away asks, if that's the case, even if you don't listen to an asay, even if you don't say Krishma in the morning, the mazid, you should get malchus, yeah? Or even if you don't eat matzah on Pesach, you should get kares. Why are we saying the only lavin? So the Gemara says, if you don't, it says, you don't observe, you're not shoymer. Or Rabbi says that the word shamar refers dafka to loisas. Says the Amar Rabbi Abin Kama Krishnami Shama Pen Ba'al. Whenever it says these lashonis of Hishama Pen Ba'al, it's like another way of saying don't. it's a lav. Ein el loisas, it's a loisas. So therefore we know that it's only referring to loisas. Since it says in the pasuk, in loisishmoir you get malchus, so it's only referring to lavin. But all lavin are included because why not? Because and even lavin sheyesh by Mrs. Bezin. So Gemara straight away asks, just a second. We know the lav shein b'maisa doesn't get malchus. We have no reason to believe that Rabbi Shmuel would argue with this. Ihachi lav shein b'maisa nami. Lav shein b'maisa should also get malchus, and nevertheless we know that most Tanaim at least hold that the lav shein b'maisa you don't get malchus. The Gemara says la seis ksiv. It says in the pasuk im loy sishmoy la seis. If you don't. So we learn from there that it's like only where you positively go against the Torah by doing a ma'isa, right? So then the Gemara asks, "Lav shenitik lasei nami." Okay, lav shenitik lasei. Where there is a ma'isa, you should get malchus. Why do we know that lav shenitik lasei like beheshiv zegzela shagazal, right? You steal. You don't get malchus because it can be fixed up by returning the gazal and chayina rabbis, other examples. So the Gemara answers, "Dum yudelav dechasima," because the pasuk by malchus straight away after the whole story of malchus giving malchus, the pasuk is loy sachsim sharbedisha, don't muzzle an ox while it's threshing, and from there we learn that malchus has to be, you only get malchus for a lav which is similar to lav dechasima, the lav of loy sachsim, which is both a lav which is not a lav anitik laseh. And that's how we know that a lav nitik lasei doesn't get malchus, because it has to be a lav which is not nitik lasei dumi de lav de chasima. The Gemara now points out that once we get to this and we say that any malchus that you receive must be for a lav which is doima to lav de chasima, it has to be similar. Hashda de osizlachi. Once we get to this, once we've established that the lav that you get malchus for has to be doima, has to be comparable to lav de chasima, kulunami dumi de lav de chasima, we can answer the others in the same way, meaning that even chayve asay and even lav she'ein by ma'isa, the reason why you don't get malchus for being over chayve asay or lav she'ein by ma'isa, we don't have to go to the reasons we mentioned earlier. It's unnecessary. We can just say because it's not doima to the lav of loisachsan, which is both a lav and it's a lav sheyesh by ma'isa. So that is the reasoning of Rabbi Shmuel, who says that even chayve misas bezin get malchus because the pasuk says im loisish meilases, which includes anything basically. It doesn't include assays or lav anitik lasays or lav shein b'maisa for the various reasons given. Ultimately, they're all not doima to the lav dechasim of loisachsim shay b'dishay, and therefore any other lav gets malchus, and that's the shitta of Rabbi Shmuel, that even chayve misas bezin, if you warn the Mechal Shabbos, for example, that you're not just going to get skila, but you're also going to get malchus, you have to get both skila and malchus. He doesn't hold, and he doesn't hold of Kedei Rishasa. We're going to have to soon see why he doesn't hold of Kedei Rishasa. We'll soon see that. But this is the broad, since there's a passage which says Loisish Melasis, everything's included. I'm going to continue with the Gemara for the moment. Fred the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva, my timer. Why does Rabbi Kiva not hold of this? In other words, Rabbi Kiva really has to answer why he doesn't hold of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel brought a pasuk in Loisish Melasis, which implies if you don't keep the Torah as a general rule, anything which is similar to Loisachsam, you're going to get malchus for. So why Chayve Misas Bezin according to Rabbi Kiva do you not get? Right? Why only Chayve Kris not Chayve Misas Bezin? The Gemara answers Kedei Rishasa. We saw this in Taftal Nam base. Kedei Rishasa, the pasuk says you get punished Kedei Rishasa for your wickedness. We learn from that. You only get punished one oynesh for one act. You don't get two oynshim for one act. And therefore, since you're going to be chayv misa over here, you don't get malchus as well. You don't get malchus as well. Just parenthetically, at this stage, according to this, Rabbi Shmuel would agree that in a situation where there was no chiyuv misa for whatever reason, like the Edom weren't master for misa, he would get malchus because the whole miyot is only because of kedei rishasa. It's only when you're getting the misa you don't get malchus. What happens if for some reason you're not getting the misa? Your taka would get the malchus. Just leave that on the side for the moment. Yeah, but that's But Rabbi Kiva, my time kedei rishasa mishum mish achasat mechayiv yet mechayiv mishum shtei rishayis. What does Rabbi Shmuel answer back? Right? Why does Rabbi Shmuel not hold of kedei rishasa? So we say no, he does hold of kedei rishasa, but he limits the application of kedei rishasa. Rabbi Shmuel hani mili miso mammon and malchus mammon. When it's two totally different types of punishments, like miso mammon and malchus mammon, then you're only going to get you're only going to get the bigger punishment. Most times, sometimes we have the principle of kolam mishalem ein eloika, but either way, we say kedei rishasa that you don't get two punishments. However, avol miso malchus misa richtai. Very interesting svar that Rabbi Shmuel holds that malchus is really just part of misa, right? We know we give him one less than he could withstand to get killed. Ultimately, in other words, it's like it's all one oynish. You're giving him physical. You're giving him a beating, you're killing him basically, and you're not going the whole way. So it's considered misa richta, and it's considered one einish is not considered two einish. All Rabbi Kiva. Now the Gemara asks a kasha. All Rabbi Kiva. If Rabbi Kiva really holds the kedei rishasa, then why chayve krisis do you get malchus? There's also two punishments, kares and Kares and Makkos. Why is he giving 2 if he holds a Kedei Rishasa? And Ihachi Chayvi Krisis Nami, and he can't say Mitzvah Richter, because if so, then he doesn't hold that far, obviously, because otherwise you would hold you get Makkos for Mitzvah's Bezin as well. So the Gemara asks Akashi, Ihachi Chayvi Krisis Nami. My Omris, what are you going to tell me? What the Brisa itself says explicitly, which is She'im Asu Tshuva, Hashtam Mius Lo Yavdi. The Gemara challenges and says that can't be the full reason for why you don't get Makkos in the case of Chayvi Krisis, because ultimately, what if he doesn't do Tshuva? Now he hasn't done Tshuva. Let's say he hasn't done Tshuva. So give him Makkos. You leave the chorus up to. In other words, why is that? Why since it's possible that he hasn't, since now he hasn't done Tshuva, so it should be considered giving him 2 punishments, and therefore you shouldn't give him Makkos. Why is it not a problem with Kedei Rishasa? So the Gemara is going to suggest one answer and ultimately reject it. Let's first see what the Gemara suggests. Amar Ravo says like this. The MS, he does hold the Kedei Rishasa, and Karet is an exception to the rule of Kedei Rishasa. The Torah explicitly says that Chayv Krisis are Chayv Makkos. In other words, even though Ba'etzim you should say Kedei Rishasa, and you shouldn't get both Karet and Makkos, but since the Torah explicitly said that Chayv Krisis are Chayv Makkos, so therefore you get Karet. Where's the Befeirush Ribs Torah? Where does the Torah say clearly the Chayv Krisis get Makkos? The Gemara says the Gomer Le'enei Milei Necha. It's a Kedei Rishava. It says the word Le'enei, and it says the word Milei. It says the word La'ene by Kares, is it? That way around? By Kares, yeah. The Nichrusu La'ene b'nei Amam, and it says La'ene by Makkos, right? No, not that pasuk. The next pasuk. Yeah, Arbaim Yakenu Lo Yosef, the Nikla Achicha Le'inecha. It says the pasuk Le'inecha, so we learn Gzei Shava, La'ene and Le'inecha. That just like it says Malchus in Parashah Malchus, it says Le'inecha, so also over here where it says Le'ene by Chayv Krisis, you get Malchus. So since there's a Beferish limit that Chayv Krisis get Malchus, so therefore you get Malchus despite the Kedei Rishasa. The question obviously is that how does this fit with what the Brisa says earlier, that the reason why you get Karis as well as Malchus is because Shem Asu Tshuva Bez and Shalmala Moichlin. The Rishonim explain that ultimately it's a combination. In other words, the Makkor in the Torah is Takela Eine and Mileinecha. The reason why that's the case is because since you could do Tshuva. Since you could do Tshuva, in other words, since Karis isn't definite, so therefore the Torah was more quicker to give you an Einish. But the Makkor for it really is not Kedei Rishasa, because then what happens if he didn't do Tshuva? The Makkor for it is the Gzei Shava Le'ene Le'inecha. Now Gemara is going to reject it now. They're asking the following kasha. Maskif Lord Rabbi Mamamel. Rabbi Mamamel asks the kasha, Ihachi, if so, that you're learning Gzei Shava Le'ene Le'inecha, so Chayv Mises Bezin Nami Nigmerei. Chayv Mises Bezin should also be included in the Gzei Shava, because there also we have Eine, Me'ene and Mileinecha. Basically, it says Me'ene by the Chet of Avodah Zarah, which is a Chayv Misa, and it says Mileinecha. So we should learn Gzei Shava one to the other. So the Gemara answers Don in Le'ene Mileinecha, ain't Don in Me'ene Mileinecha. It's too dissimilar. The words Me'ene and Le'inecha are too dissimilar. Mashenki Le'ene and Le'inecha both start with a lamma. The taka ends off differently, but they're not too dissimilar. But the Me'ene to Le'inecha it starts differently, ends differently, is too different, and therefore we don't learn the Gzei Shava to Chayv Mises Bezdin. Fred Gemara Kasha Ma'in after mina. How can you say such thing? So what? In other words, he's going to bring an example of another case where we learn a Gzei Shava even though it's not exactly the same words. Baltana the Beri Rishmal. The Brisa says in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, "V'shava kohen uvo kohen." The pasuk says, "V'shava kohen, the kohen will return. Uvo kohen, the kohen is going to come." It's talking about visiting the bias which has saras, right? And the Gemara learns Shava zui shiva v'zui bia, that whatever applies by one applies to the other. If you get to Rashi, we'll see exactly what those dinim apply to. But the point is that we learn Gzei Shava from V'shava kohen uvo kohen, since the toichen is the same. It's both talking about the kohen coming into the house, even though one uses a lashon uvo kohen and one says V'shava kohen. Nevertheless, we compare the dinim one to the other. So for sure, Le'ene and Mileinecha should also learn one from the other. Zui shiva zui bia. But oid, another kash is ligmar me'ene mile'ene. Another kash is that taka you can't learn, even if you're going to tell me that they do have to be very similar, the two words that we learn in Gzei Shava. So you can't learn Chayve Krisis from Chayve Malchus to say that Malchus applies to, that you can't learn Chayve Mises Bezdin from Chayve Malchus. Nevertheless, you can do a two-stage Gzei Shava. because you learn from Chayve Malkus to Chayve Krisis that the Chayve Krisis get Malkus from the Gzeir Shava mentioned above, La'einecha. And then you can learn a different Gzeir Shava from the Chayve Krisis, the Chayve Mises Bezin, from the fact that it says Me'ene to La'ene. In other words, it's similar enough that from Chayve Krisis you learn Chayve Mises Bezin. Because we already learned Le'ene Milenecha to go from Chayve Malkus to Chayve Krisis. Now just take it from Chayve Krisis to Chayve Mises Bezin with the Gzeir Shava Me'ene Mile'ene. So ultimately, the Gemara basically at this stage is asking a kasha: how can you say that you learn Gzeir Shava Le'ene Milenecha that Chayve Krisis is an exception to the rule of Kedei Rishasa, and you give two punishments, Kares and Malkus, when if you're going to learn Gzeir Shava, then you're going to apply it to Mises Bezin as well. And then Rabbi Kiva is going to be the same as Rabbi Shmuel, which he doesn't agree. So it doesn't work. So the Gemara Taka answers that we reject the teretz of Rabbi, and the Gemara's answer ultimately is Kibla Minei Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, that he was makabel from Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. Kedei Rishasa mishum Risha achas atam mechayv ve'iyat mechayv mishum shtei Rishayis b'Risha Masur lebezne kasam adama. He was makabel at Kedei Rishasa, since Kedei Rishasa is talking in the context of giving Malkus, which is a oynish which is given from Bezdin by Bezdin. So therefore we learn that it's only an oynish which Bezdin gives that we say Kedei Rishasa. So therefore, Mises Bezdin and Malkus, you can't give both Kedei Rishasa. The Karis, which is given by the Eibishter, or Mises Shamayim for that matter, or any punishment which is given by the Eibishter, it's not considered Shtei Rishayas if Bezdin gives one of them and the Eibishter gives the other. So that's the ultimate teretz. In other words, that the reason of Rabbi Shmuel, the reason Rabbi Kiva, who says that Chayve Krisis don't get Malkus, is because there's no Kedei Rishasa over there, because in his opinion, Kedei Rishasa is only Berisham Sur Lebez, only when both punishments are being given by Bezin. Karis isn't given by Bezin, so therefore they get Malkus. Let's continue and try and finish the Amud. Rava says a different shot entirely, meaning it's not just an answer to the most recent question. Rava's good. We're going back on the whole Hemshech over here. That you want to know what the reason of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva is? It's a whole different machlokes. It's not to do with everyone agrees with Kedei Rishasa. Everyone holds you don't give two punishments. And the machlokes of Shmuel Rabbi Kiva is only talking about a situation where you're not giving the misa, because right, Rava Ama Asru Beilik Tala, if they aid him with Taka Masra, that you're going to be Chayiv Misa. Kula Amal Pligaden like Mes. Even Rabbi Shmuel agrees that you don't get both Malkus and Misa because we say Kedei Rishasa, we don't hold the Misa Richta. It's real Kedei Rishasa. You don't get two punishments. Keep Liga. What's the machlokes? Because the Asr Beila Malkus, where he only got Hasra for Malkus. Rabbi Shmuel Sava Lavshin if Nazar's Mrs. Bezin Loikanol. Rabbi Shmuel holds there's no problem with Kedei Rishasa because he's not getting two punishments. What's the only issue over here? It's a lav shenitza Nazar's Mrs. Bezin. The lav itself was told to tell you don't do this because if you do, you're going to get Mrs. Bezin. So he says that lav shenitza Nazar's Mrs. Bezin ain't loikanol. The lav don't be Michal Shabbos is telling you don't be Michal Shabbos. And if you do, you're going to get punished for the mitzvahs bezin, but it can't be used also to tell you that you're going to get an oynish mal, because ein oynish elam came as here. We don't punish you unless you get warned. And over here, the warning was for the misa, not for the warning of the Torah. When the Torah says loy, don't be mechal Shabbos or any other misas bidei shamayim, bidei adam. Sorry, it's a lavshin nazar's misas bezin. Sorry, so Bishmal holds a lavshin nazar's misas bezin. Yeah, loy kinala. Rabbi Kiva saw a lavshin nazar's misas bezin. Ein loy kinala, because since the lav is given for nazar's misas bezin to tell you don't do, and if you do, you get punished by the bezin, you can't get malchus. Rabbi Kiva, what about Rabbi Kiva? Why does he not? So why doesn't he apply it also to karis? In other words, the Torah, when it says don't eat chametz on Pesach, is telling you that if you do, you're going to eat karis. You're going to get karis. And how can we give you malchus if it's a lav shenit nazar's karis? Rav Mordechai said to Rav Ashi, this is what Avimi said from Hegroin, which made Rav in the name of Rava. Chayve krisus don't need hasra. In other words, the ein oinshalim kemasin only applies to misa b'dei adam. Otherwise, the Torah can say don't do something, and you're going to get kares. We don't need the lav for that. So the kares is ki kaloicha chametz and nichus. It says you get kares for eating chametz. When it says don't eat chametz, that lav can tell us that you're going to be chayiv malchus. And it's not considered a lav shenitin as haris kares. That's not what the lav's doing it, because kares doesn't need the Torah to tell you not to do it. Doesn't need the ancient McKin Mazir. And he gives a raya. The raya is that you don't need a straf for kares. You don't need a oinit, right? You don't need a lav. You don't need mazhirin for chiyuv kares, because Pesach and Mila both chiyuv ase, and you get kares despite the fact that the Torah doesn't say don't stay uncircumcised, right? Right? Doesn't say it in such a nusach. So therefore, it's a raya that chayv kriz lo tzrich hasra. Now the Gemara asks the kasha v'dul mazhar lekarbon. maybe true chai v'krisis don't need asra, but you get a carbon b'shoigeg. If you do a chai v'krisis b'shoigeg, you chai a carbon. Maybe the lav in the Torah is to tell you don't do b'shoigeg, because if you do b'shoigeg, you're gonna get a carbon. And the raya, the Gemara is even going to bring a raya. That's the case. The Pesach Hamila, the less bazar loy ma'aseh carbon. We take a see the Pesach Hamila where there's no lav, there's no ashara. It doesn't say don't do it, don't not eat the Pesach, don't not do a bris milah. Loy ma'aseh carbon. You take a don't bring a carbon for shoigeg. So this seems to indicate that you only get a carbon where there's a lav, and if that's the case, then the loy sasa, which is said by Karis, is needed for carbon, and they can't be used for Malkus. So Gemara answers no. Your assumption, your premise is wrong. The reason why you don't get as hard, you don't get, there's no chi of carbon by Pesach or Mila is not because there's no azhara, but rather for a different reason, because the whole Torah is compared to avodas kichavim. Avodas kichavim shaval taisa, just like avodas kichavim, you are shaval taisa, meaning the Torah is telling you don't do something, and you're going and doing it. Afkol shaval taisa. So also, you only get you only chayv shoigeg, you only chayv carbon chatas for a shoigeg if it's a certain lab where the Torah says don't do something and you're going to do something. Lafuke hani de kumasei mashenke means where the Torah is telling you yes to do something and you're not doing it. So this is really the end of the Amud, and I think we'll stop over here, and Rashi you'll have to learn by yourself. So that's okay. Okay. So just to quickly, this is just there's a lot of information over. Just to quickly summarize the Amud, there's a Mishnah with all the different dinim of Chayve Malkus. There's a Braisa which says 3 shittas tanoim of when you get Chayve Malkus. The shitta of Rabbi Shmuel is always basically even Chayve Misas Bezin. Rabbi Kiva says not Chayve Misas Bezin, but yes Chayve Krisis. Rabbi Yitzchok says not even Chayve Krisis. And on this Amud we explain the reason both for Rabbi Shmuel and for Rabbi Kiva. The reason for Rabbi Shmuel, the first stage of the Gemara, is because it says in Loisish Melases, which tells me that any type of lab which is dumya ultimately to Loisachsain, which is right lav shesh b'maisa, and it's not a lav anitik lasei, you're going to get Malkus for. Rabbi Kiva argues because of Kedei Rishasei. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't hold of Kedei Rishasei by such a situation of Misa Malkus because he holds it Misa Richt. It's all one long Misa, and the reason why by Kares there's no Kedei Rishasei according to Rabbi Kiva. Why does he say you get both Kares and Malkus? The Gemara tries to say it's from a Gzeir Shava, but ultimately the Gemara says Berisha Masur LeBezin Akas Medaba. The Kedei Rishasei only applies when both punishments are given by Bezin. Rav has a whole different approach. The issue is not a Kedei Rishasei approach. We're not talking about 2 punishments. Everyone agrees you don't give 2 punishments. Even Rabbi Shmuel would say you never give Misa and Malkus as well. The Nidin is where you're not getting the Misa. They only warn for Malkus. And the Machlokes is whether Lav Shenitzin Azharis Misas Bezdin gets Malkus or not. And the Lav Shenitzin Azharis Karis does get Malkus because ultimately Chayve Krisis Loy Srichi Hasra. That's the Kitzer, the Amud. Okay. So we'll stop over here. And yeah. I'm going to assume I'm doing the review. Yeah?